The night air was sharp with the scent of rain as Lily hurried down the street. She was already late for her evening shift at the small cafe she worked at. The sidewalks were slick, and the streetlights cast a dull orange glow across the wet pavement. She barely noticed the speeding car coming down the road until it was too late. A deafening screech of tires tore through the silence. Lily froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The car swerved, barely missing a nearby streetlight before slamming into the guardrail. The metal of the car crumpled like paper as the impact reverberated through the night. Before she could even process what had just happened, her instincts kicked in. Without thinking, she ran toward the wreckage, ignoring the pounding rain and the increasing roar of oncoming traffic. The smell of burning rubber and gasoline filled the air. As she reached the wreck, her eyes locked onto the figure inside, an older man, unconscious, slumped against the seat. His face was bloodied, his chest heaving weakly, but his pulse was still there. Lily's hands were shaking as she grabbed for the door handle. The car was mangled, and the door wouldn't budge. She yanked harder, desperate. The window was shattered, the shards glittering in the dim light. With one last tug, the door gave way, swinging open to reveal the man, now barely breathing. She had no idea who he was or why he'd crashed, but there was no time for questions. The rain was pouring harder now, drenching her clothes and making the ground slippery beneath her feet. Her heart pounded in her ears as she pulled him out, feeling the weight of his body pressing down on her small frame. She struggled to drag him a few feet away from the wrecked car, trying not to let the rain blur her vision. Her breath came in short bursts as she finally collapsed beside him on the cold, wet ground. She checked his pulse again. Still weak, but it was there. Her mind raced. She had no medical training, but there was no one else around. It was just her and this stranger, alone in the middle of the storm. She wasn't going to let him die here. She shouted for help, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the storm, but there was no one in sight. The cars on the road had slowed, but they just kept passing by, as if they couldn't be bothered to stop. But then, as if by some miracle, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. The car pulled over, and a man rushed out, his expression filled with urgency. He knelt beside Lily, his eyes widening when he saw the condition of the man on the ground. "Is he alive?" the stranger asked, kneeling next to her. "Barely," Lily responded, her voice trembling. She didn't even know how she had the strength to speak, but there was no time to feel the exhaustion sweeping over her. The man quickly took control, pulling out his phone and calling for an ambulance. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. The rescue team arrived, and within moments, the injured man was whisked away to the hospital. Lily stood there, soaked to the bone, watching them take him. Her heart still raced, and the adrenaline hadn't worn off. But just as the chaos began to calm down, the stranger who had helped her turned to her. "Do you know who he is?" the man asked, his eyes scanning her face. Lily shook her head. "No. I just saw him crash. I couldn't leave him there." The man looked at her for a moment, as though considering something, before he spoke again. "He's someone important. I'll make sure you're compensated for what you've done. He'll want to thank you." Before Lily could respond, the man turned and walked back to his car, leaving her standing alone in the storm. 100 questions ran through her mind. Who was this man she just saved? Why had he crashed? What did the stranger mean by someone important? Little did Lily know, this was just the beginning. The next day, the police would show up at her door, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The rain had stopped by the time Lily arrived home. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained. The adrenaline from the accident still buzzed in her veins, making her feel like she was in a daze. She stripped off her soaked clothes and collapsed into bed, her mind spinning. She hadn't even had a chance to get her bearings before the night had turned into an uncontrollable whirlwind. Lily didn't know who the man was, or why he'd crashed, but she couldn't shake the image of his battered body. The thought of him lying there, struggling for breath, haunted her as she lay awake in the darkness of her small apartment. Was he okay? Was he alive? Did he even know who had saved him? The questions gnawed at her, leaving her unsettled. The next morning, she tried to go about her day as usual. She had to get ready for her shift at the cafe, but the hours dragged by. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the crash, to the man she had helped, and to the stranger who had shown up just in time. Who was he? What was his connection to the man she saved? The cafe was quiet that day, a stark contrast to the chaos she'd experienced the night before. As Lily wiped down tables, her mind kept replaying the scene in vivid detail. She wished she could forget it, but the image of the man's face, bloodied and pale, kept resurfacing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was involved in something much bigger than just a random accident. Later that afternoon, as Lily prepared to close up the cafe, she felt a strange sense of unease. There was something in the air, a tension she couldn't explain. She locked the door and turned off the lights, just as the sound of a car pulling up outside broke the silence. Her heart skipped a beat. She peered out the window, her breath catching in her throat when she saw the sleek black car parked in front of the cafe. It was the same car that had stopped during the accident. Before she could react, the door opened, and the man from the night before walked in. He was dressed in a suit, his face still carrying the sharp, professional edge he'd had when he'd helped her save the stranger. He looked around the empty cafe before his eyes landed on her. "Lily, right?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. She nodded, still a little shaken by his sudden appearance. "Yeah, that's me. What's going on? Is he okay?" The man didn't immediately answer, but his eyes softened for a moment. "The man you helped is alive, yes. He's in the hospital, recovering. But that's not why I'm here." Lily's heart raced. "Then why are you here?" He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "I'm here to make sure you're taken care of. You did something incredibly brave last night. Something that most people wouldn't have done." He paused, as if gauging her reaction. "And because of that, your life is about to change." Lily's stomach twisted with confusion. "What do you mean?" The man gave a slight smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I don't think you realize who you just helped." Lily frowned, her mind still reeling from the events of the previous night. "What are you talking about?" "I just helped a guy who was in a crash." The man nodded, then leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice. "The man you saved is Richard Weston. He's a billionaire businessman. And now, he wants to thank you. But not in the way you think." Lily stared at him, her thoughts spinning. She had no idea who Richard Weston was, but the name sounded familiar. Billionaire businessman? What kind of people were involved in this? What had she gotten herself into? The man's tone grew more serious. "You did something that most people wouldn't have done. You saved a man's life. Now, Mr. Weston wants to meet you, to make sure you're compensated for your actions. He's grateful." Lily didn't know what to say. She wasn't interested in any sort of reward. She had only done what anyone else would have done in that situation. But she also couldn't deny the part of her that was curious. Who was Richard Weston? What kind of compensation was he talking about? As the man handed her his business card, his gaze hardened. "Just know this, Mr. Weston doesn't do anything without reason. He's a complicated man. Don't trust everything you hear. But don't turn him down either." With that, he turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving Lily standing there in stunned silence. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked down at the card in her hand. The words "Richard Weston Enterprises" were printed on it in bold letters, and beneath that, the address of his company's headquarters. Lily felt a chill run down her spine. She hadn't expected any of this. She had saved a stranger from a car crash, and now she was being dragged into the world of a billionaire. Her life, so simple just days ago, was already starting to feel like it was spiraling out of control. What had she just gotten herself into? The next morning, Lily woke up with a heavy feeling in her chest. The events of the previous day were still fresh in her mind. She had tried to push them away, to go about her life as normal, but the weight of what had happened seemed to hang over her. Richard Weston, the billionaire businessman, was no longer just a name to her, he was someone whose life she had saved, and now, she couldn't escape the looming questions about what this all meant. She was in the middle of making a cup of coffee when the knock came. At first, she thought it was a mistake, someone at the wrong apartment or a delivery. But when she walked over to the door and peered through the peephole, her breath caught in her throat. 2 police officers stood on the other side, their uniforms sharp and their faces serious. She hadn't done anything wrong, had she? A million thoughts raced through her mind as she hesitated, unsure whether to open the door. What could the police possibly want with her? Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. "Hello?" she asked, her voice betraying the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Miss Lily, is it?" one of the officers asked, his tone polite but firm. He was tall and built like someone who had seen a fair share of action. His partner, a woman, stood silently beside him, watching Lily closely. "That's me," she said, her throat dry. "Is everything okay?" The officers exchanged a look before the male officer spoke again. "We need to speak with you about an incident that took place last night. The car accident. Do you mind if we come in?" Lily's mind raced. The accident. She had expected someone, maybe even the businessman himself, to come by, but the police? She stepped aside, allowing them to enter. Once inside, the male officer spoke. "We understand you were the one who helped Mr. Weston after the crash. Is that correct?" Lily nodded, still in shock. "Yes, I found him after the accident. I just did what anyone else would have done." The woman officer, who had remained silent until now, took a step forward. "The thing is, Miss Lily, the crash was not an accident. We're still investigating, but it seems that Mr. Weston's car was intentionally forced off the road. Someone tampered with the brakes." Lily's blood ran cold. "What? You're saying someone did this on purpose?" The male officer nodded grimly. "We don't have all the details yet, but yes. And because of this, the situation is much more serious than it seemed. We need to know everything you can tell us about what happened." Lily's head was spinning. The night had been a blur of confusion and chaos, but now, hearing that the crash was deliberate made her feel even more exposed. Was she involved in something dangerous? Was she just an innocent bystander, or had her actions set something in motion that she couldn't control? She began to recount everything she could remember: the crash, the man's bloodied face, the stranger who helped her, and the rescue team arriving. But when she mentioned the man's name, Richard Weston, the officers exchanged a knowing look. The silence in the room was thick with unspoken words. "Do you know what Mr. Weston does for a living?" the female officer asked, her eyes narrowing. Lily shook her head. "No, I didn't know who he was at the time. I didn't even know his name until yesterday." The officer's expression hardened. "He's not just a businessman, Miss Lily. He's been involved in some very high-stakes ventures. We're talking about things that go far beyond what you or I can understand." Lily's heart skipped a beat. She had known nothing about this man. She had just helped a stranger, someone who, in her eyes, was in danger. But now, it seemed like her good deed had entangled her in something she wasn't prepared for. The male officer's voice broke through her thoughts. "Listen, Miss Lily, we're not accusing you of anything, but we need you to be cautious. The people involved in this incident are not people you want to cross. Lily looked at them, feeling the weight of their words pressing down on her. I just want to know if he's okay, she said, her voice shaky. I didn't sign up for all this. The officers looked at each other once again before the male officer spoke. We understand. But this situation is much more complicated than just a simple crash. We'll let you know if we need any more information from you. In the meantime, you should know that Mr. Weston will likely reach out to you. We recommend you be careful when he does. With that, the officers left as quietly as they had arrived, leaving Lily alone with her thoughts. She closed the door behind them, her mind racing. There was a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had taken a sharp turn into unfamiliar, and possibly dangerous, territory. Richard Weston wasn't just a grateful stranger, he was involved in something much darker than she could have imagined. And the police had warned her, she was now a part of something that might be bigger than herself. As the minutes ticked by, Lily sat down on her couch, trying to make sense of everything. She had saved a man from a car crash, and now the police were warning her about the danger that came with knowing him. Her phone buzzed. It was a message. She opened it quickly, her heart pounding as she read the words, "We need to talk. I'm Richard Weston. Meet me at my office tomorrow. It's important." Lily stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Tomorrow. It seemed like this was only the beginning. Lily couldn't shake the nagging feeling that her life had been irrevocably changed. From the moment she pulled the man from the wreckage, everything had shifted. She had always been just an ordinary girl, going through life without much thought of the future. But now, a billionaire businessman and the police were involved. What had started as a simple act of kindness had spiraled into something she couldn't fully comprehend. The message from Richard Weston hung in the air like a weight. We need to talk. I'm Richard Weston. Meet me at my office tomorrow. It's important. She stared at the text, unsure of what it meant. Why would a man like him want to meet with her? She wasn't anyone special. Just a girl who happened to be in the right place at the right time. The next day, Lily found herself standing in front of a towering glass building in the heart of the city. She had never been to a place like this before, everything about it screamed wealth and power. The polished floors, the sleek elevators, the suits walking past with purposeful strides. She felt like she didn't belong here, a small fish in a tank full of sharks. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The receptionist greeted her with a smile, as if it was perfectly normal for someone like her to be there. Can I help you? The woman asked, her voice smooth and professional. I'm here to meet Mr. Weston, Lily said, her voice wavering slightly. He asked me to come. The receptionist nodded and gestured for her to follow. They walked down a long hallway until they reached a set of large, imposing doors. The receptionist knocked lightly before opening them. Inside, Richard Weston was standing by the window, his back to her. He didn't turn when she entered, but his voice, deep and confident, broke the silence. Lily, he said, without looking at her. I've been expecting you. Lily's heart skipped a beat. His voice was calm, but there was something in it that made her uneasy. She couldn't tell if it was the power he exuded or the way he spoke as if everything were already decided. She walked into the room, her eyes scanning the luxurious space. Everything about it screamed money, expensive paintings on the walls, marble floors, sleek furniture. But none of it seemed to make the room feel warm. It was a place of business, not comfort. Richard finally turned around and walked toward her. He was tall, dressed in a tailored suit that fit him perfectly. His dark eyes held a calm intensity as he studied her. Lily couldn't quite place it, but there was something about him, something that made her feel both intrigued and cautious. I'm glad you came, Richard said, his voice softer now. I know you didn't expect any of this. I certainly didn't expect to be in your debt. But you saved my life, Lily. That doesn't go unnoticed. Lily felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't done anything special. She had just acted in the moment. I didn't do it for anything in return, she replied quietly. I just saw someone in need. Richard nodded, his expression unreadable. I believe you. But there's more to this than just a crash. You were in the right place at the right time, yes. But what you don't realize is that your life is about to change in ways you can't even imagine. Lily's stomach twisted with unease. She wanted to ask him what he meant, but the words wouldn't come out. What did he want from her? Why was he speaking like this? She had no idea what she had walked into, but something told her that whatever it was, it wouldn't be easy. I don't know what you're offering, but I'm not looking for anything, Lily said, shaking her head. I don't want any trouble. I just want to go back to my life. Richard's eyes softened slightly, but there was still a weight to his gaze. I'm not asking you to change your life, Lily. But I can't pretend that you're not involved in something now. You've seen things, heard things, that could put you in danger. Lily's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Richard took a deep breath and walked over to his desk, sitting down in the chair behind it. He gestured for her to sit, but Lily remained standing, her legs feeling like jelly beneath her. I run a very successful business, Lily, Richard said. But I'm also involved in things that go beyond the boardroom. Things that are complicated. Dangerous. And now, you're a part of it. He paused, as if considering his next words carefully. What I'm offering you is a chance to be a part of something bigger. A chance to live a life that most people only dream of. Lily stared at him, her mind racing. This was it, the moment when she had to make a decision. What could she do? She had no experience with anything like this. She had grown up in a small town, worked a part-time job at a cafe. Her life had been simple, predictable. Now, she was being thrust into the world of a powerful businessman, a world of danger and secrets. Richard continued, his tone persuasive. I can offer you financial security, opportunities you could never imagine. But it comes with a price. You'll be involved in my world, for better or for worse. And once you're in, there's no going back. Lily felt a cold sweat form on her brow. She had never been good with decisions, and this one felt impossible. On one hand, the idea of a life of luxury, of not worrying about bills or the future, was tempting. But on the other hand, the risks seemed too high. What would she be getting into? And was it worth it? Before she could speak, Richard leaned forward, his gaze intense. Think about it, Lily. You saved my life. In return, I'm offering you a chance to change your life forever. You don't have to make a decision now, but I need to know where you stand. Lily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle in her chest. This wasn't just an offer, it was a turning point. Her life could go in so many different directions, and this man, this billionaire, was offering her a chance to be part of something that could change everything. But was she ready? Lily couldn't sleep that night. The offer Richard Weston had made to her kept playing over and over in her mind, like a haunting melody that wouldn't let go. She tossed and turned in bed, her thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She had never been one for ambition, for power, or wealth. Her life had been simple, uncomplicated. She had been content with her small apartment, her job at the cafe, and the little pleasures she found in her everyday routine. But now, everything had changed. She had seen a glimpse of a life beyond the small, safe world she knew, and it was hard to ignore. Richard Weston, a man who seemed to have everything, had promised her the world. Financial security, opportunities, and, perhaps most compelling of all, a life that was bigger than the one she had imagined for herself. But with all of it, there was a shadow. There were dangers she didn't fully understand, secrets Richard was only hinting at, and a world she had no experience in. The following day, Lily met Richard again at his office, her nerves on edge. She had agreed to come back and talk more, but she wasn't sure what she was walking into. What more could he tell her? What was really at stake here? When she arrived, Richard was already waiting for her in his office. He seemed more relaxed than before, but Lily could tell there was still something beneath the surface, a quiet intensity that he couldn't hide. "Lily," Richard greeted her, standing up from his desk and gesturing for her to sit. "I know you've had time to think. I also know this is a lot to take in. But I want you to understand what I'm offering." Lily nodded, her throat tight. "I'm not sure I understand anything yet," she replied, her voice shaky. "You've made me an offer, but I don't know what's really going on. What is it that you do? What world am I being pulled into?" Richard didn't respond immediately. He studied her for a long moment, as if deciding whether to reveal more. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "It's complicated. You won't believe the full extent of it. But you deserve the truth, so I'll give you a glimpse." He paused, his fingers tapping lightly on his desk. "I run a corporation, yes. Weston Enterprises is a conglomerate that stretches into various industries, real estate, finance, tech, you name it. But my involvement goes far beyond the boardroom. I've been involved in covert operations, dealing with things that most people can't even begin to imagine. Business deals, negotiations, power plays, and sometimes, things that aren't so legal." Lily's heart raced, the weight of his words sinking in. "What do you mean, not so legal?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard met her gaze, his expression hardening. "I've been part of a network of people who manipulate markets, sway governments, and shape the world from the shadows. It's not glamorous, and it's not something I'm proud of. But it's how I've built my empire." Lily's mind reeled. She had known something was off about all of this, but hearing Richard speak so openly about his involvement in such dangerous activities was a shock. She had always thought that billionaires were just businesspeople who made their money in boardrooms, not in secretive, high-stakes operations. "I never wanted to drag you into this world," Richard continued, his tone softer now. "But what you did, saving my life, that wasn't just an act of kindness. You've witnessed something now, something you can't unsee. And there are people who will take advantage of that." Lily shook her head, her stomach twisting. "I don't understand. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to help." Richard leaned forward, his expression intense. "And you did, Lily. You saved my life, and because of that, you've become a part of a story that's bigger than either of us. There are powerful people who want to know what you saw that night, what you know about me. They'll come after you if you don't make the right choices." Lily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She hadn't realized the full scope of the danger she was in. She had thought she was just doing the right thing by helping someone in need. But now she was learning that there were consequences to every action, consequences she hadn't even begun to understand. "And if I say no?" Lily asked, her voice barely audible. Richard's gaze softened for a moment, but the seriousness never left his eyes. "If you say no, you risk everything. Your safety, your peace of mind, your future. The people I'm involved with don't care about your intentions, Lily. They care about power, control, and information. And now you're a part of that. Whether you like it or not." Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She felt trapped, cornered by a situation that she couldn't escape from. She had never wanted any part of this world of power struggles and shadows. All she had wanted was to live her life, to help a stranger in need. But now, it seemed like there was no going back. Richard stood up and walked toward the window, his back to her. "I'm offering you a choice, Lily. You can accept my offer, step into this world, and let me protect you. Or you can walk away, and face the consequences alone. Lily stared at the back of his figure, her mind racing. She was in deeper than she had ever thought possible. Her life, once so simple, was now a tangled web of secrets, power, and danger. She had to decide whether to accept this new life or walk away, but doing so might cost her more than she was ready to lose. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, but one thing was clear: no matter what decision she made, her life would never be the same again. Lily sat frozen in the luxurious office, her mind a maze of confusion, fear, and indecision. Richard Weston's words echoed in her ears. "You can accept my offer, step into this world, and let me protect you. Or you can walk away, and face the consequences alone." The choice hung before her like a dark cloud, suffocating her. She had never expected any of this. Just days ago, she had been a simple girl, working at a small cafe, dreaming of a quiet life. Now, she was standing on the edge of something she could barely comprehend, a world of power, corruption, and secrets. The thought of walking away was tempting. She could go back to her small, quiet life, leave behind all the danger and uncertainty. She could forget about Richard Weston, his dangerous connections, and the hidden world that he had dragged her into. But even as the thought crossed her mind, another part of her hesitated. Richard wasn't offering her just wealth or security. He was offering her a life she could never have dreamed of, a life of influence, of power, of freedom from all the struggles she had known. But what was the cost? She looked at Richard, who stood by the window, his back to her. His calm exterior masked something darker. She could see the weight of the choices he had made, the price he had paid for the empire he had built. But could she be a part of that world? Could she accept the dangers, the secrecy, and the constant pressure of being involved with people who played by rules she couldn't even begin to understand? "Is this the life you want for me?" Lily asked, her voice quiet but filled with the raw edge of emotion. She didn't know why she was asking it. It was as if she needed Richard to acknowledge just how overwhelming this was for her, as if his validation would give her the strength to make her decision. Richard turned slowly, his face softened, though the underlying tension was still palpable. "No, Lily. I didn't want to drag you into this. I didn't want you to have to make this choice. But now that you've seen it, now that you're involved, you don't have many options. The question is, do you want to live in the shadows, where I can protect you, or do you want to step out into the light, knowing that the people who would harm you will be watching your every move?" Lily clenched her fists, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to surface. She had never been good at making decisions. She had always been someone who went along with what life handed her. But this was different. This was a choice that could change everything. "What do I do if I say no?" she asked, her voice trembling. Richard's gaze hardened. "If you say no, you have to be prepared to live with the consequences. You won't be able to go back to your old life. The people I'm connected to will find you. They won't care about your intentions. They'll see you as a liability. And that's something they don't tolerate." Lily felt a lump rise in her throat. The weight of his words hit her like a punch. She had thought that helping a stranger would end with a thank you, a life-saving gesture that would make her feel proud. Instead, it had opened the door to a world she didn't belong in, a world of shadows and hidden agendas. "But I don't want that life," Lily said, the words escaping her before she could stop them. "I just want to be normal again." Richard's expression softened for a moment, but he didn't approach her. Instead, he stayed by the window, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. "I understand. I didn't want this for you, Lily. But I can't change what's already happened. What I'm offering is a way out, if you choose it." Lily looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of his words pressing on her chest. She didn't know if she could handle this kind of life. She didn't know if she had it in her to live with the constant fear, the secrecy, the pressure. But she also knew she couldn't walk away. Not after what she had seen. Not after what she had been pulled into. She had saved a man's life. But now, it seemed like that act had set in motion a series of events that would change her forever. "Are you sure this is the only way?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard looked at her then, his eyes hard and unflinching. "I wish there was another way, Lily. But right now, this is the only way I can offer you. The only way I can protect you." Lily took a deep breath, her mind still racing. She was standing at a crossroads, and there was no going back. She could take the path Richard had laid out for her, the path of power and danger, or she could walk away and face the unknown consequences. But as much as she wanted to believe that she could return to her old life, Lily knew deep down that there was no escaping what had already happened. She had been thrust into a world she didn't understand, and now, it was up to her to decide how to navigate it. "I'll do it," she said, her voice barely audible. Richard looked at her, his eyes unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Good," he said, his voice low. "You've made the right choice." Lily felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but she knew it was too late to turn back now. The decision had been made. Her life, as she had known it, was gone. And in its place was a new life, one that would challenge her, shape her, and perhaps, in the end, destroy her. But for now, it was all she had. The weeks that followed were a blur of new faces, secret meetings, and unfamiliar routines. Lily had made her choice, and there was no going back. Richard Weston, for all his flaws and secrets, had kept his word. He introduced her to his world, one of high-stakes business deals, shadowy figures, and a life she never imagined she could be a part of. At first, it was thrilling. The wealth, the power, the sense of belonging to something bigger than herself, it was intoxicating. Lily was swept into meetings that took place in luxurious penthouses, attended galas where the world's richest and most powerful people. "Richard," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "I'm not sure I can do this anymore." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You knew what you were getting into, Lily. You knew the risks." "I didn't know the cost," she replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I thought I could handle it, but it's changing me. I'm not the same person I was when I helped you that night. And I don't know who I am anymore." Richard sighed and walked toward her. "I never wanted this for you. I never wanted to drag you into my world. But you're here now. And sometimes, we don't get to choose the path we're on." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I know. But I can't keep living like this. I've learned something important through all of this, Richard. I've learned that no amount of power or wealth can make you feel whole if you lose yourself in the process." For a moment, there was silence between them. Then, Richard nodded slowly, his expression softening. "I understand. And you're right. You can't keep living this way if it's not who you are." Lily stood up, feeling the weight of her decision. It was time to leave. Time to walk away from the world that had consumed her. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Richard's world didn't let people go easily, and there were consequences for those who tried. But she had learned that sometimes, the hardest decision was the one that brought peace, the decision to walk away from everything that wasn't meant for you. "I'm going," she said, her voice firm now. "I need to find myself again." Richard didn't try to stop her. Instead, he looked at her with a mixture of respect and sadness. "I wish you the best, Lily. I really do." As she walked out of the office, the weight on her shoulders began to lift. It wasn't easy to leave behind the wealth, the power, the life she could have had. But Lily knew she couldn't keep living in the shadows. She had to find her own way, her own path. And as she stepped back into the world she once knew, Lily realized that the greatest gift she could give herself wasn't the money or the connections, it was the courage to be true to who she was. No amount of power could replace the peace that came with knowing you had made the right choice. The lesson was clear: sometimes, we have to let go of the life we think we want in order to find the life we truly need. And in the end, true strength lies not in what we gain, but in what we're willing to walk away from. And with that, Lily's journey had come full circle. The life she had once dreamed of was now a reality, but it was one she had earned on her own terms, not through the choices of others. And that was enough.